the galaxy mapped by Harry Seldon's psychohistory. The future was mathematics made manifest. Equations so precise they predicted the fall of empires centuries before the first corrupt official took their bribe. Probability curves that charted humanity's destiny across millennia, with margins of error measured in decimal points. For 800 years since Seldon's death, the Foundation had grown from a small colony of scientists on Terminus into a galactic power that wielded nuclear fire and economic dominance, all according to calculations that had never, not once, failed to predict the broad sweep of human events. Until the day the calculation screamed impossible. The anomaly appeared first as a distortion in psychohistorical models that shouldn't have existed, a probability spike registering 0.000% chance of occurrence manifesting anyway, violating fundamental mathematical laws the way a rock might decide to fall upward. Foundation mathematicians stared at their holographic displays, showing futures that branched into chaos, timelines that refused to resolve, predictions collapsing into static where certainty should have reigned absolute. Then the rift opened above Anacreon, a Foundation vassal world whose rebellion and reconquest had been predicted to the month by Seldon himself. And something impossible tore through the fabric of space with violence that made hyperspace look gentle. It wasn't a wormhole, wasn't a hyperspace anomaly. It was a wound, a tear in reality itself. Bleeding energy signatures that Foundation sensors couldn't classify, radiating power that made nuclear reactors look like candles by comparison. And through that wound came ships. Not Foundation vessels with their brutal efficiency and nuclear arsenals, not even Imperial remnant ships with their outdated grandeur. These were massive, wedge-shaped behemoths measuring over a kilometer long, their hulls plated in armor that reflected Anacreon's sun like polished mirrors, their weapon systems carrying energy signatures that suggested capabilities far beyond anything psychohistory had predicted humanity would develop for another 3 centuries. Star destroyers, though the Foundation had no name for them yet, no context for understanding that these vessels represented military technology from a civilization that had never heard of Harry Seldon, but had never needed psychohistory because they'd built their galactic civilization on entirely different principles. And leading that fleet, standing on the bridge of the lead star destroyer, was Jedi Master Sarek Ordain, a Keldor whose breathing mask and dark robes marked him as something the Foundation had no framework for understanding. A warrior monk who commanded mystical energies that violated every law the Foundation's science had established. Master Ordain felt the wrongness before his instruments registered it. The Force, the energy field that connected all living things, that guided Jedi and sustained their powers, felt muted here, as if passing through a filter that stripped away harmonics he'd never realized existed until they were absent. His connection remained, but it was like hearing music through water, distorted, dampened, fundamentally altered by an environment that operated on principles his home galaxy had never encountered. Master Ordain, his second-in-command, reported, a human Jedi Knight named Kira Voss, whose confusion matched his own. Hyperspace readings are completely wrong. The navigation computers can't determine our location. And the Force, do you feel it? It's like we're partially deaf. I feel it, Ordain confirmed, his dual voices harmonizing through the mask's translator. Whatever happened during that hyperdrive malfunction, we're no longer in our galaxy. perhaps not even in our universe. The Force exists here, but it's different, weaker, or perhaps simply less pervasive. The malfunction had occurred during what should have been a routine jump. The Jedi Task Force had been transporting Republic humanitarian supplies to an Outer Rim colony when their Star Destroyer's hyperdrive had suffered a catastrophic failure that tore them from normal space-time and deposited them here, wherever here was. Incoming transmission, the communications officer announced. Audio only. Language is, sir. The translation matrix is working, but the linguistic patterns are unlike anything in our databases. They're human, definitely human, but the cultural references are completely foreign. Put it through, Ordain commanded. The voice that emerged was male, measured, carrying the careful neutrality of someone accustomed to speaking with authority, but uncertain of the threat they were addressing. Unknown vessels, this is Foundation Fleet Command, operating under authority of Mayor Hardin of Terminus. You have entered Foundation space without authorization and with military capabilities that violate multiple treaty agreements. Identify yourselves immediately or be considered hostile forces subject to nuclear deterrence. Nuclear deterrence. The threat was clear, even if the political context wasn't. These people, the Foundation, possessed nuclear weapons and weren't afraid to use them against perceived threats. Ordain made a decision that would, in retrospect, begin the chain of events leading to war neither civilization could stop. Foundation Fleet Command, Ordain replied, using the Force to project calm and peaceful intent through his words, a subtle Jedi technique that usually eased tensions during first contact scenarios. I am Master Sarek Ordain of the Jedi Order, representing the Galactic Republic. We mean no harm. Our arrival in your space was unintentional, the result of a hyperdrive malfunction. We seek only to understand where we are and to establish peaceful relations while we determine how to return to our home galaxy. The silence that followed lasted exactly 4.7 seconds, long enough for Ordain to sense confusion and alarm radiating from the Foundation vessels surrounding them, but not long enough for the response that came next to be anything except prepared contingency. Unknown vessels, a different voice said, female and carrying authority that suggested high political rank. So you will power down all weapon systems and submit to Foundation inspection teams. Any use of abilities described as Jedi or attempt to influence Foundation personnel through unexplained means will be considered an act of war. You have 1 standard hour to comply. Ordain felt the shift in the Force, a ripple of alarm from his fellow Jedi as they sensed the trap being constructed around them. The Foundation ships were positioning themselves in a formation that suggested they'd fought void combat extensively, that they had tactics and strategies refined through actual warfare rather than just theoretical planning. Master, Kira said quietly, they're treating us like an invasion force, and they mentioned unexplained means. Do they know about the Force? How could they know we were trying to project calm? They didn't know, Ordain realized, his mind racing through implications. But they detected something. These people have technology or abilities that let them sense when we use the Force, even if they don't understand what they're sensing. And their response to detecting it was immediate threat assessment. He looked at the Foundation fleet surrounding them, 30 vessels, each one smaller than a Star Destroyer, but numerous enough to present genuine danger if armed with nuclear weapons as threatened. His task force had 3 Star Destroyers, a complement of fighters, and approximately 200 Jedi across the vessels. In a straight fight, the Republic forces would almost certainly win. Star Destroyer shields and weaponry were designed to face planetary-scale threats. But winning meant potentially killing thousands of people from a civilization they knew nothing about, starting a war with a polity they didn't understand, and stranding themselves permanently in a universe where the Force itself behaved differently. "Stand down weapons," Ordain ordered, making another decision that history would judge harshly. "But maintain shields. We'll allow their inspection teams aboard under diplomatic protocols. And Kira, alert all Jedi to suppress Force usage unless absolutely necessary for defense. These people can detect it somehow, and it clearly frightens them." What Master Ordain didn't know, couldn't know, because psychohistory was utterly foreign to everything the Jedi had ever encountered, was that his arrival had already triggered cascading failures in predictions that governed the Foundation's entire strategic framework. On Terminus, in the calculating rooms, where psychohistorians had maintained Selden's plan for 8 centuries, emergency sessions convened as models that had never failed suddenly couldn't account for variables that shouldn't exist. The Jedi, the Force, technology centuries beyond predicted development curves, and most troubling, the ability to influence human behavior through means that psychohistory's mathematical models couldn't quantify, predict, or counter. Hari Seldon's recorded hologram, activated for only the most severe crises, materialized in the Foundation's council chambers and delivered words that would echo through both civilizations. If you're seeing this message, it means psychohistory has encountered a variable I didn't account for. Something or someone has entered the galaxy whose actions cannot be predicted through mathematical analysis of human mass behavior. This represents either the greatest opportunity or the greatest threat the Foundation will ever face. Choose wisely. The survival of the plan, and perhaps of human civilization itself, depends on how you respond to the unpredictable. The hologram faded, leaving Foundation leadership staring at the implications, and in the depths of the lead Star Destroyer, hidden among the Republic crew, a Sith Lord smiled behind a carefully maintained disguise. Darth Ravius had infiltrated this mission specifically because the Force had shown him visions of a great opportunity approaching, a chance to extend Sith influence into new territory, to corrupt a civilization that had never encountered the dark side. He'd assumed the opportunity would come from whatever colony world they were meant to assist. Instead, the Force had delivered him an entire galactic civilization that had no defenses against Sith manipulation, no understanding of how the dark side could twist minds and corrupt institutions. And best of all, these psychohistorians were so confident in their mathematical predictions that they'd never imagined someone could deliberately engineer the exact social pressures needed to make those predictions fail catastrophically. The war, Ravius knew, was already inevitable. He just needed to make sure it started in ways that would maximize chaos and create the desperation necessary for the dark side to take root in this new galaxy. The dimensional rift pulsed with energy above Anacreon, connecting 2 realities that had never been meant to meet, and neither the Jedi nor the Foundation understood. Yet that first contact between incompatible civilizations wasn't the beginning of understanding. It was the countdown to war, The inspection teams arrived within the hour, and Master Ordain immediately understood that the Foundation's approach to first contact was fundamentally different from anything the Republic had ever practiced. They weren't diplomats, they were psychologists. The team that boarded the lead Star Destroyer consisted of 12 individuals wearing simple, functional clothing that suggested a civilization prioritizing utility over ceremony. But their eyes, Ordain noticed it immediately through the Force, carried the focused assessment of people trained to read human behavior with precision that bordered on supernatural, except it wasn't supernatural at all. It was mathematics. The lead inspector introduced herself as Dr. Ebling Miss, first speaker of the Second Foundation, though she offered no explanation of what Second Foundation meant, or how it differed from the Foundation Fleet Command that had issued the initial threats. Master Ordain, Dr. Miss said, her voice carefully modulated to project neither threat nor submission, a perfectly calculated neutrality that made Ordain's Jedi senses prickle with wariness. Before we begin formal negotiations, I need to understand what your people did approximately 7 minutes ago when you responded to Fleet Command's hail. Our psychological monitors detected an anomalous influence radiating from your vessel, subtle, operating below conscious awareness, designed to produce emotional responses in our personnel without their knowledge. Explain this capability immediately. Ordain felt his fellow Jedi tense around him, recognizing the confrontation forming despite his efforts at peaceful contact. The Jedi use the Force to project calm during tense situations, he explained carefully, choosing honesty over deception. It's not mind control. We don't compel actions or override free will. We simply ease tension, create emotional space for rational dialogue to occur. You manipulate neurochemistry to alter decision-making capacity without consent, Dr. Miss translated, and her tone carried the clinical precision of someone describing a weapon system rather than a diplomatic technique. In Foundation space, that capability is called psychological warfare and is banned under the Convention of Calgon. Its use against Foundation personnel is considered an act of aggression equivalent to opening fire. We didn't know, Kira started, but Dr. Miss raised a hand. Your ignorance of our laws doesn't change the fact that you deployed a psychological weapon against Foundation forces within seconds of first contact, Dr. Miss continued. This is being reported to the Mayor's Council as evidence of hostile intent. However, I'm authorized to offer an alternative interpretation, that you're telling the truth about unintentional arrival, that your Force abilities are standard for your civilization and not deployed maliciously, and that mutual understanding is possible despite fundamental incompatibility in how our civilizations approach human cognition. She paused, and Ordain sensed calculation beneath her words. Not deception exactly, but strategic communication designed to achieve specific psychological outcomes in him and his crew. To reach that alternative interpretation, Doctor, Miss said, you'll submit to what we call psychological mapping, non-invasive observation of your cognitive patterns, decision-making processes, and the mechanisms underlying these Force abilities. We need to understand what you are before we can determine whether coexistence is possible. Ordain felt the trap closing even as he recognized he had no choice but to accept it. Refuse, and the Foundation would treat them as hostile invaders. Accept, and they'd be submitting to examination by people whose capabilities He didn't understand using methods the Force couldn't adequately warn him about. "We'll cooperate," Ordain decided, "but I require assurance that this examination won't be weaponized against my people or used to develop countermeasures to Jedi abilities." "Doctor?" Miss smiled, a carefully measured expression that conveyed exactly the amount of reassurance calculated to ease tension without making promises she couldn't keep. "Master Ordain, everything we learn will be incorporated into psycho-historical models. That's not a threat. It's simply how the Foundation functions. We predict human behavior through mathematical analysis. Your arrival represents variables we need to quantify. Whether that quantification becomes weaponized depends entirely on whether your civilization proves hostile to Foundation interests." The examination took place in the Star Destroyer's medical bay, converted into an observation chamber where Foundation psychologists could monitor Jedi demonstrating Force abilities under controlled conditions. Ordain volunteered himself as the primary subject, believing his experience and training would provide the most accurate representation of Jedi capabilities. What followed was the most unsettling experience of his 8 decades of life. Dr. Miss and her team observed as Ordain demonstrated telekinesis, precognition, Force persuasion, and healing techniques. They didn't react with wonder or fear. They reacted with the focused attention of scientists, observing phenomena that violated known physical laws, but which could nonetheless be measured, quantified, and incorporated into predictive frameworks. The telekinetic effect operates through mechanisms our instruments can't directly detect, Dr. Miss narrated into a recording device, her voice clinically detached. But the neurological patterns in the subject's brain during Force usage show consistent activation clusters in regions associated with spatial reasoning and kinesthetic awareness. Hypothesis: the Force is a perceptive ability that allows direct interaction with quantum-level phenomena, creating macro-scale effects through precise manipulation of probability curves at the particle level. "That's not how the Force works," Ordain objected, disturbed by the reduction of something he'd spent decades understanding as mystical connection to mere quantum mechanics. "The Force is the energy field created by all living things. It binds the galaxy together. It has a will, a purpose. It guides those who listen to it." Anthropomorphized interpretation of quantum entanglement phenomena, Dr. Miss replied without malice. "Your civilization has developed a religious framework around abilities that we would classify as advanced human cognitive evolution. Neither interpretation is inherently more valid. They're simply different models for explaining the same observable effects." She gestured to holographic displays showing mathematical equations Ordain couldn't begin to parse. "What concerns us is that your abilities operate outside psychohistorical prediction. When you use this Force persuasion on a human subject, you introduce variables that our mathematical models can't account for. That makes you, all of you, fundamentally unpredictable from a psychohistorical perspective." "And unpredictability," came a new voice from the medical bay's entrance, "is the greatest threat the Foundation has ever faced." Ordain turned to see a man who radiated authority, despite wearing the same functional clothing as Dr. Miss's team. He was perhaps 50 standard years old, his face bearing the lines of someone who'd carried the weight of civilization on his shoulders and had learned to function under that burden. "Mayor Salvor Hardin," the man introduced himself, extending a hand in what Ordain recognized as a diplomatic greeting gesture. "I rule Terminus and, by extension, coordinate the Foundation's response to the current crisis, which is what your arrival has become. Dr. Miss, has your examination confirmed the threat assessment?" "Yes, Mayor," Dr. Miss replied, her clinical tone acquiring an edge of concern. "May the Jedi possess abilities that can directly influence human decision-making in ways psychohistory cannot predict or counter. If they chose to deploy these abilities systematically, they could collapse the Selden plan by introducing cascade failures in our predictive models. Every interaction between their people and ours represents a potential deviation from projected timelines." "We don't want to collapse anything," Ordain insisted, frustration bleeding into his voice despite Jedi training in emotional control. "We're not conquerors or manipulators. The Jedi serve peace and justice. We use the Force to protect the innocent and maintain balance. Your assumptions about hostile intent are based on fear of the unknown, and not on any actions we've actually taken. Your intentions are irrelevant to psychohistorical analysis," Hardin replied with the blunt pragmatism that had made him legendary in Foundation politics. "Psychohistory doesn't predict individual motivations. It predicts mass behavior of large populations across time. The problem isn't that you might be hostile. The problem is that your very existence in our galaxy makes accurate prediction impossible. And without accurate prediction, the Foundation loses the primary advantage that's allowed us to survive for 8 centuries. He pulled up holographic displays showing branching timeline projections, mathematical models so complex that Ordain couldn't follow their logic, but he could see the pattern. Before the Jedi arrival, the projections showed clean, converging probability curves. After the arrival, the projections fragmented into chaos, with probability branches splitting exponentially into futures the Foundation couldn't predict. "See this?" Hardin gestured to the chaotic projections. "This is what you've done to the future simply by existing here." The Selden plan predicted the Foundation would face a military crisis with Anacreon in approximately 4 months. We were prepared. We had economic and political strategies ready that would have resolved the crisis without warfare, maintaining the plan's trajectory toward establishing a second galactic empire within 1,000 years. But now the Anacreon crisis might not happen at all. Or it might happen tomorrow. Or it might escalate into full galactic war. We don't know. Because the equations can't account for beings who can influence human behavior through means mathematics can't model. "Then expand your models," Ordain suggested, trying to find common ground. "We'll teach you about the Force, help you understand how Jedi operate so you can incorporate us into your predictions. There must be a way to achieve coexistence that doesn't require treating us as existential threats." "We're trying," Dr. Miss interjected, "but preliminary analysis suggests that true psychohistorical modeling of Force users would require understanding the fundamental physics underlying these abilities, physics that appear to violate every principle our civilization is built on. It would take decades of research, perhaps centuries, to develop mathematical frameworks that could accurately predict Force-influenced behavior. And we don't have decades. The Selden plan operates on strict timelines. Deviations measured in years can compound into catastrophic failures over centuries. What none of them knew, what even the Force couldn't clearly warn Ordain about, because Sith deception ran so deep was that Darth Ravius was listening to every word of this conversation through surveillance devices he'd discreetly planted in the medical bay, and he was already implementing the plan that would ensure war became inevitable. Ravius had spent 2 days studying Foundation psychology and psychohistory through stolen data and careful force manipulation of lower-ranking personnel who wouldn't be missed. He'd learned that the Foundation was governed entirely by mathematical predictions, that they'd structured their entire civilization around Hari Seldon's plan, and that they reacted to unpredictability with extreme measures designed to eliminate variables that threatened their precious calculations. He'd also learned something the Foundation's psychohistorians didn't fully appreciate about their own system. It was vulnerable to precisely the kind of manipulation the Sith had perfected over millennia. Psychohistory predicted human behavior based on the assumption that individuals acted according to rational self-interest, modified by cultural conditioning and social pressures. It couldn't predict Force users, true, but it also couldn't predict someone who understood its principles and deliberately engineered situations that would force the Foundation to make decisions that cascaded toward conflict. Ravius's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Make the Foundation believe the Jedi were preparing for conquest, while simultaneously making the Jedi believe the Foundation was developing weapons to counter Force abilities. Neither side needed to actually be guilty for the spiral of mutual suspicion and preemptive strikes to become self-sustaining. He began with a simple act, using the dark side to influence a Foundation communications officer into discovering encrypted transmissions between the Jedi vessels. Transmissions that Ravius had fabricated to suggest the Jedi were requesting reinforcements from their home galaxy and planning to establish a military beachhead in Foundation space. The transmissions were sophisticated enough to pass initial analysis, but obvious enough that Foundation intelligence would break the encryption within days. And once they did, psychohistorical models would calculate that the highest probability response to an imminent invasion was preemptive strike before Jedi reinforcements could arrive. Simultaneously, Ravius planted evidence in Jedi databanks suggesting the Foundation was developing new weapons specifically designed to disrupt Force abilities, weapons that would render Jedi powerless and vulnerable to conventional attack. The evidence was subtle enough that most Jedi would dismiss it, but Ordain, as mission commander, would feel obligated to investigate. An investigation would look like preparation for conflict to Foundation observers, confirming their fears that the Jedi were hostile. The spiral was already beginning. 3 days after the examination concluded, Mayor Hardin summoned Master Ordain to Terminus for what was described as high-level diplomatic negotiations. Ordain agreed, taking Kira and a security detail of 20 Jedi to the Foundation's capital world. What greeted them was a city built on mathematical precision rather than artistic expression. Buildings arranged in patterns that optimize traffic flow and resource distribution. Streets laid out according to algorithms that minimize travel time. Every aspect of urban planning determined by equations rather than aesthetic preference or historical accident. It was efficient, soulless to Ordain's perspective, but undeniably efficient. The negotiations took place in the mayor's palace, a structure that resembled a computational center more than a seat of government. Hardin was direct to the point of bluntness. Our intelligence services have detected encrypted communications between your vessels, Hardin said, projecting holographic transcripts that made Ordain's blood run cold, despite having no knowledge of their origin. Communications requesting military reinforcements and discussing strategic assessment of Foundation defensive capabilities. This, combined with your demonstrated ability to influence human behavior through unexplained means, has led the Foundation Council to conclude that your mission was not accidental but rather reconnaissance for a planned invasion. That's absolutely false, Ordain protested, reaching out through the Force to sense Hardin's emotional state and finding nothing. The mayor's mind was shielded somehow, or perhaps so disciplined through decades of political maneuvering that his surface thoughts revealed nothing useful. We've sent no such communications. We don't even know how to contact our home galaxy from here. This is fabricated intelligence designed to create conflict where none exists. Then explain the encrypted transmissions our technicians intercepted, Hardin challenged. Explain why your vessels have been conducting detailed scans of Foundation military assets. Explain why psychological profiles of your Jedi show consistent patterns of beings trained for combat, far more than for diplomacy despite claims of being peacekeepers. We're warrior monks, Kira interjected, her voice tight with the frustration of being trapped in accusations they couldn't disprove. We train for combat because the galaxy, our galaxy, is dangerous, and the Jedi are often the last defense against those who would prey on the innocent. But that doesn't make us conquerors. Your intentions remain irrelevant to the mathematics, Hardin replied, and Ordain sensed the mayor actually believed what he was saying, wasn't lying or manipulating, but genuinely convinced by evidence that the Jedi had been framed with. Psychohistorical projections now show an 87% probability of military conflict within the next standard month if current trajectories continue. The Foundation doesn't initiate wars, but we also don't allow ourselves to be conquered by forces we can't predict or control. You have 1 week to prove your peaceful intentions through verifiable action. Otherwise, the Foundation Council will authorize first strike protocols to eliminate the unpredictable variable you represent before you can threaten the Selden plan. The meeting ended without resolution, and as Ordain's shuttle returned to the Star Destroyers, Kira voiced what they were all thinking. They are going to attack us, not because we've done anything wrong, but because their mathematical models tell them we're a threat. And we can't prove we're not because everything we do to demonstrate peaceful intent looks like preparation for war through their analytical framework. Ordain nodded grimly, feeling the Force churning with dark portents of conflict he couldn't prevent through diplomacy or reason. And if we defend ourselves when they attack, we'll confirm their assessment that we're hostile invaders. If we don't defend ourselves, we'll be destroyed by a people who genuinely believe they're protecting their civilization from existential threat. Neither of them sensed Darth Revious's satisfaction as the Sith Lord observed their conversation through the Force, watching the cascade toward war accelerate exactly as he'd engineered it. The dimensional rift pulsed above Anacreon, connecting 2 galaxies that should never have met, and in the cold mathematics of psychohistory and the mystical currents of the Force, the same conclusion was emerging from incompatible analytical frameworks. War was now inevitable, and once it began, neither side would be able to stop it. before both civilizations learned the terrible truth about what happens when fundamentally incompatible realities collide. The war began not with a declaration, but with mathematics. Foundation Fleet Command received psychohistorical projections showing that the probability of Jedi aggression had crossed the critical threshold, 92.7%, where preemptive action became statistically mandatory to preserve the Selden plan's integrity. The projections were clear. Delay meant allowing an unpredictable force to establish themselves permanently in Foundation space, creating cascade failures in predictions that would compound across centuries into civilizational collapse. The Foundation Council voted 8-3 to authorize what they clinically termed variable elimination protocols. No one used the word war. War implied conflict between equivalent forces, political objectives, territorial disputes. Now, this was something else entirely. The surgical removal of a mathematical anomaly that threatened the computational foundations of their entire society. Mayor Hardin dissented, one of the 3 votes against authorization, but he was overruled by council members who'd spent 8 centuries trusting psychohistory over human judgment. The math was clear, the threat was quantified, action was required. The Foundation fleet positioned itself around the Jedi Task Force's location in high orbit above Anacreon. 60 nuclear-armed warships arranged in a formation that psychohistorical battle algorithms had determined would maximize probability of successful elimination while minimizing Foundation casualties. Each ship carried weapons that could vaporize cities, coordinated through targeting systems that had been refined through centuries of theoretical warfare the Foundation had thankfully never needed to wage in practice. Until now. Aboard the lead Star Destroyer, Master Ordain felt the shift in the Force moments before his tactical officer reported the Foundation fleet's repositioning. Danger, imminent violence, the cold certainty of people who'd made the decision to kill and were now simply executing that decision with mechanical efficiency. "They're preparing to fire," Ordain said, his dual voices tight with the terrible knowledge that he'd failed to prevent exactly what he'd been sent to avoid. "Battle stations, raise shields, but do not, I repeat, do not fire first. We defend only. We are not starting this war." "Master, they have nuclear weapons," Kira protested, her hand already moving toward tactical controls. "Our shields can withstand nuclear strikes, but if we don't respond with overwhelming force immediately, they'll interpret restraint as weakness and press the attack." "Then let them press it," Ordain replied, making a decision that would be debated by military historians for generations. "We're Jedi. We defend, we protect, but we don't initiate violence against people who genuinely believe they're defending their civilization. If we can survive their assault without killing Foundation personnel, we prove through action that we're not the threat their mathematics claim we are." What Master Ordain didn't understand, couldn't understand because no one from the Star Wars galaxy had ever encountered psychohistory, was that restraint wouldn't change Foundation calculations. The math didn't care about intentions. It cared only about capabilities and probabilities, and beings who could survive nuclear strikes while choosing not to retaliate were even more dangerous than beings who would fight back, because they represented variables that violate the most fundamental psychohistorical principle, that humans acted according to predictable patterns of self-preservation. The Foundation fleet opened fire, 60 nuclear warheads launched simultaneously, their trajectories calculated by algorithms that had predicted the exact position the Star Destroyers would be in when the weapons arrived. The mathematics was perfect. The execution was flawless, and it accomplished absolutely nothing. The Star Destroyer's shields, energy barriers designed to withstand turbo-laser bombardments that operated on principles Foundation science had never developed, absorbed nuclear detonations that should have vaporized any vessel. The explosions created brief flares of radiation and heat that dissipated against the shields like waves breaking against cliffs, magnificent in their fury but ultimately impotent against defenses from a civilization that had been fighting galactic-scale wars for millennia. Aboard Foundation Command, Admiral Sennett stared at sensor readings that made no sense according to any physical principles her civilization understood. Direct nuclear strikes, her weapons officer reported, voice tight with disbelief. All 60 weapons achieved detonation at calculated impact points. 0 damage to target vessels. Their defensive screens are absorbing energy outputs that should exceed any material's thermal tolerance thresholds by 3 orders of magnitude. Admiral, this isn't possible. The physics doesn't work. The physics works for them, Sennett replied grimly, already running new calculations based on this devastating data, which means everything psychohistory predicted about achievable technology levels in this era is wrong. These people, whoever they are, wherever they came from, possess capabilities centuries beyond our development curve. Dr. Miss Emergency Psychological Projection. What's the probability that beings with this level of technological superiority would refrain from immediate retaliation? Dr. Miss, present on the flagship's bridge, specifically to provide real-time psychohistorical analysis, I was already inputting data into her portable calculating device. Probability of non-retaliation given, demonstrated technological advantage, 0.03%. They should be destroying our fleet right now. The fact that they're not suggests either extreme confidence that they can eliminate us at will or, she paused, recalculating, or they genuinely don't want to fight. But that makes them more dangerous, not less. An enemy who restrains themselves despite overwhelming advantage is an enemy with long-term strategic objectives we can't predict. Recommendation? Admiral Sennett demanded. Continue assault, Dr. Miss replied without hesitation. Force them to reveal their full capabilities. Every action they take gives us data to incorporate into predictive models. If we can quantify what they can do, we can eventually predict what they will do. And prediction means we can develop countermeasures. The Foundation fleet fired again and again. Nuclear weapons, conventional missiles, kinetic kill vehicles, accelerated to relativistic velocities. Every weapon system Foundation military science had developed across 8 centuries, all deployed in coordinated salvos designed to overwhelm defensive capabilities through sheer volume. The Star Destroyer's shields held. And aboard those vessels, 200 Jedi felt the wrongness building, the dark corruption in the Force that suggested this wasn't simple military conflict, but something orchestrated by malevolence with purposes beyond what either side understood. Master Ordain reached out through the Force, searching for the source of the corruption, and found it. A presence aboard his own flagship, hidden behind screens of deception, so sophisticated that only the sustained violence had created enough disturbance to make the disguise crack. A Sith on his ship had been there the entire time, watching, waiting, manipulating. "Kira," Ordain said quietly, his voice carrying the deadly calm of a Jedi Master who'd identified the true enemy. "Take command. Maintain defensive posture only. I'm going hunting." He found Darth Ravius in the ship's secondary data center, surrounded by computer terminals displaying stolen Foundation intelligence and fabricated communications. All the evidence that had driven both sides toward this unnecessary war. "Master Ordain," Ravius greeted him. His disguise finally dropped to reveal the Sith Lord's true appearance. A human male, perhaps 40 years old. His face bearing the corruption of decades spent channeling the dark side. His eyes carrying the yellow tinge that marked deep immersion in Sith philosophy. "I wondered how long it would take you to find me. Longer than I expected, honestly. The Jedi really have grown complacent in their arrogance." "You did this," Ordain stated, his lightsaber igniting with the characteristic snap hiss that had become synonymous with Jedi justice. "You engineered this war, planted false evidence, manipulated both sides into believing the other was hostile. Why? What do you gain from forcing two civilizations into conflict?" "Chaos," Ravius replied simply, his own red-bladed lightsaber igniting to match Ordain's green blade. "The Foundation is built on order, on mathematical certainty, on the belief that the future can be predicted and controlled. But chaos, true chaos, defeats prediction, defeats order, creates the desperate conditions where the dark side flourishes. I'm going to give this galaxy something it's never experienced, unpredictability so profound that their precious psychohistory collapses entirely, and in the resulting chaos, the Sith will rise." They fought in the confined space of the data center, two Force users wielding weapons and powers that represented philosophies fundamentally opposed. Ordain fought defensively, seeking to disable rather than kill, to preserve life even when facing an enemy who'd orchestrated mass violence. Ravius fought with the aggressive passion that characterized Sith combat philosophy, striking to kill, to overwhelm, to prove through victory that the dark side was superior to Jedi restraint. The duel raged while outside. The Foundation fleet continued its assault, and the Star Destroyers continued absorbing damage without retaliating. And on Terminus, psychohistorians watched their projections, fragmenting further into chaos as new data points, technological capabilities that shouldn't exist, restraint that violated behavioral predictions, combat between individuals wielding energy weapons in patterns that suggested superhuman reflexes cascaded through their models. The Selden plan was unraveling in real time, and no amount of mathematical recalculation could stop it. Aboard the Foundation flagship, Dr. Miss made a decision that would define her legacy. "Admiral, request immediate communication with the Jedi vessels. Tell them we're prepared to discuss ceasefire terms if they'll explain what's happening aboard their ship. When our sensors are detecting energy signatures consistent with their weapon systems, but the signatures are internal rather than external. They're fighting someone aboard their own flagship." The transmission went out, and after a tense 30 seconds, Kira's voice responded, "Foundation Command, this is Knight Voss of the Jedi Order. Master Ordain is currently engaged with a hostile force that has been manipulating both our civilizations toward war. We have evidence that the intelligence you received regarding Jedi military preparations was fabricated by this hostile actor. We believe your decision to attack was based on false information deliberately planted to create conflict." "Prove it?" Dr. Miss demanded. "Stand by," Kira replied. Then, making a decision that violated a dozen Jedi protocols about sharing sensitive information with unknown civilizations, transmitting complete data logs from our systems, showing fabricated communications and evidence of tampering, also transmitting sensor records of the individual Master Ordain is currently fighting a Sith Lord from a faction in our galaxy that represents everything the Jedi oppose. This individual has been aboard our vessel since before we arrived in your space and has been manipulating events to serve his own agenda. The data came through and Foundation analysts began processing it with the desperate speed of people who just realized they might have started a war based on manufactured intelligence. Back in the data center, Ordain's duel with Ravius reached its climax. The Sith Lord was skilled. Decades of training in the aggressive forms of lightsaber combat that prioritized overwhelming offense over defensive technique. But Ordain had 8 decades of experience, had fought in the Clone Wars during his youth, had survived encounters with beings far more powerful than one Sith Lord operating alone. "You've already lost," Ordain said, his blade meeting Ravius's in a clash that sent sparks cascading across computer terminals. "The Foundation is learning the truth. The war you engineered is ending before it can escalate beyond repair. Your chaos is being quantified, predicted, neutralized by the very mathematics you thought you were defeating." "You think mathematics can defeat the dark side?" Ravius laughed, pressing his attack with renewed fury. "The dark side is passion, is emotion. It is the fundamental human drive for power that no equation can suppress. I don't need this war to continue. I just needed it to start. That's enough. The Foundation has learned that unpredictable threats exist, that their precious Selden plan can fail, that uncertainty is possible. That knowledge alone will poison their civilization from within. Doubt, once introduced, cannot be mathematically eliminated." He had a point, and Ordain knew it. Even if they stopped this war, even if they proved Ravius had manipulated both sides, the damage was done. The Foundation had learned that their predictive models could fail catastrophically. That knowledge would change how they approached future threats. It would introduce hesitation and second-guessing into a civilization that had functioned for 8 centuries on absolute confidence in mathematical certainty. But Ordain had learned something too during his weeks in this strange galaxy. That different civilizations approached the same problems through fundamentally different frameworks, and that neither approach was inherently superior. The Foundation's psychohistory and the Jedi's connection to the Force were simply different tools for understanding reality, and perhaps, just perhaps, combining those tools could create something stronger than either alone. He disarmed Ravius with a precise strike that sent the Sith's lightsaber spinning across the room, then used the Force to bind the Sith Lord in an invisible grip that prevented movement without causing harm. "You're right that doubt has been introduced," Ordain acknowledged. "But you're wrong about what that doubt will produce. The Foundation will adapt. They'll incorporate what they've learned about Force users into their models. They'll expand their understanding of what's possible. And yes, that will change them. But change isn't the same as collapse. Evolution isn't the same as chaos. He activated his comlink. Kira, I have the Sith Lord in custody. Transmit his confession to Foundation Command, along with our complete intelligence files on Sith manipulation tactics. Show them exactly how they were deceived and by whom. Then prepare to open dialogue with their psychohistorians. Real dialogue based on honesty instead of fear. If we can't go home, and I suspect that dimensional rift is a one-way passage, then we need to find a way to coexist with this civilization. The response from Kira carried relief and trepidation in equal measure. Understood, Master, but ordain. Foundation Command is requesting something in return for ceasefire. They want you to meet with their leaders, not just politicians, but the psychohistorians themselves. They want to understand the Force, want to see if it can be incorporated into the Selden plan. They're offering collaboration instead of conflict. Ordain felt the Force shifting, not toward darkness or light, but toward something unprecedented. 2 galaxies, 2 civilizations, 2 incompatible ways of understanding reality being forced into cooperation because the alternative was mutual destruction. Tell them I accept, Ordain replied, but on one condition: they help us understand psychohistory in return. If we're going to coexist in this galaxy, we need to understand how they think, how they predict, how they've built a civilization on mathematics rather than mysticism. Perhaps the Force and psychohistory aren't as incompatible as both sides assumed. The war ended not with victory or defeat, but with an agreement so unprecedented that neither side fully understood its implications. The Jedi would teach the Foundation about the Force, and the Foundation would teach the Jedi about psychohistory. 2 analytical frameworks meeting for the first time, with the potential to either destroy each other or to create synthesis that transcended both. But as Admiral Sennett ordered the Foundation fleet to cease fire, and as the Star Destroyers finally lowered their shields in a gesture of trust, neither side understood yet that the war, while ended, had changed both civilizations irrevocably. The dimensional rift still pulsed above Anacreon, and through it, something was watching. Something that had observed the brief conflict between Force users and psychohistorians, and had reached a conclusion that neither side would appreciate. If one small Jedi task force could disrupt psychohistorical predictions, this catastrophically, what would happen when the entire Star Wars galaxy, Jedi and Sith, Republic and Empire, millions of Force-sensitive beings, learned that a doorway had opened to a universe where their abilities made them gods among humans who'd never encountered the Force? The war that had just ended was not the war Master Ordain and Mayor Hardin feared. It was merely the opening skirmish in a conflict that would determine whether 2 incompatible realities could truly coexist, or whether the collision between mysticism and mathematics would ultimately consume both galaxies in flames neither side could predict or prevent. And in the depths of Foundation space, Harry Seldon's contingency programming, activated for only the second time in 800 years, displaying a message to psychohistorians who'd just learned their predictions could fail. If you're seeing this, it means the plan has survived a crisis I could not predict. The future is now genuinely uncertain. Use this uncertainty wisely. The greatest discoveries come not from confirming what we already believe, but from encountering what we never imagined possible. The Foundation's purpose has always been to preserve and advance human knowledge. Perhaps the unpredictable variables that now exist in our galaxy are not threats to be eliminated, but opportunities to learn things mathematics alone could never reveal. Proceed with caution, proceed with wisdom, but above all, proceed. The war no one could stop had ended, but the transformation it had begun was only beginning, and neither Jedi philosophy nor psycho-historical projection could predict where that transformation would lead. The alliance between the Jedi and the Foundation was born from necessity rather than trust, and both sides understood that collaboration didn't erase the fundamental incompatibilities that had nearly led to mutual annihilation. The joint research facility was established on Terminus, in a newly constructed complex that represented architectural compromise between Foundation efficiency and Republic aesthetic sensibilities. One wing housed psycho-historians, with their calculating engines and probability matrices. The other wing housed Jedi with meditation chambers and training halls. The central chamber, where both groups would meet to share knowledge, was deliberately neutral, furnished with nothing except tables, holographic displays, and the palpable tension of civilizations learning to speak each other's languages. The Master Ordain sat across from Dr. Ebling Miss and Mayor Hardin, with Kira and a dozen other Jedi flanking him on one side, while Foundation psycho-historians and political leaders occupied the other. Between them lay the evidence of Darth Revius's manipulation, fabricated intelligence, tempered communications, psychological warfare tactics that had exploited both civilizations' blind spots with surgical precision. The Sith Lord is currently in Foundation custody, Hardin began, his voice carrying the weariness of someone who'd narrowly avoided catastrophic war and was now dealing with implications that extended far beyond immediate crisis. Our psychologists have been attempting to interview him, but he's demonstrated the ability to influence interrogators through means our screening protocols can't detect. Dr. Miss, your assessment? Doctor, Ms. consulted her data tablet, her expression troubled in ways that transcended professional concern. The subject possesses psychological manipulation capabilities that operate through mechanisms we cannot measure or counter. He can induce emotional states, plant suggestions, and alter perception in ways that our conventional psychological defenses are completely ineffective against. Recommendation: either transfer him to Jedi custody or develop entirely new containment protocols based on principles Master Ordain's people can teach us. We'll take custody, Ordain agreed immediately. Sith manipulation is something Jedi are trained to recognize and resist. Though I'll warn you, Revius is skilled enough that even Jedi interrogation will be challenging. The dark side grants abilities that light side users can only counter and never fully neutralize. Dark side? Light side? Hardin repeated, his analytical mind clearly struggling with concepts that defied the materialist framework Foundation science was built on. Master Ordain, help me understand something fundamental. You describe the Force as if it has moral qualities, as if energy itself can be good or evil. That's not how physics works in our understanding. Energy is neutral. It's the application that carries moral weight, not the energy source itself. Ordain paused, searching for words that could bridge the conceptual gap between mystical tradition and scientific materialism. Imagine consciousness is not merely an emergent property of complex neural patterns, but a fundamental aspect of reality itself. The Force is that consciousness, the galaxy's awareness of itself, It's experiencing and influencing reality through living beings who can perceive and channel it. The dark side is what happens when beings use that connection for selfish purposes: domination, hatred, fear, suffering. The light side is using the same connection for selfless purposes: protection, compassion, justice, harmony. Anthropomorphic projection onto quantum phenomena, Dr. Miss murmured, but her tone suggested she was beginning to question whether that dismissal was adequate. Except our observations of Force users demonstrate effects that shouldn't be possible if we're merely discussing psychological states influencing probability curves. The telekinesis alone violates conservation of momentum unless there's an actual energy transfer mechanism our instruments can't detect. There is, Kira interjected. Having spent the past week working with Foundation scientists to develop experimental protocols for studying the Force. We've been conducting tests. When I use the Force to move objects, your instruments detect localized gravitational anomalies and quantum entanglement patterns that shouldn't exist according to your physics. The Force doesn't violate your laws. It operates through mechanisms your current scientific framework hasn't discovered yet. She pulled up holographic data showing gravitational readings during Force telekinesis demonstrations. See this spike? That's me using the Force to lift a 1 kilogram mass. Your sensors detected gravitational distortions, equivalent to what a significantly more massive object would generate, localized to the exact space where I was applying Force influence. The energy comes from somewhere, through pathways we don't fully understand ourselves. We just know it works, and we've built a philosophical framework around that practical knowledge. The Foundation scientists leaned forward, studying the data with the focused intensity of people encountering phenomena that simultaneously violated and validated different aspects of their understanding. This was what they'd trained for, incorporating new data into predictive models, expanding the boundaries of human knowledge, maintaining the Selden Plan's core mission of preserving and advancing civilization, even when that civilization encountered the genuinely unprecedented. If we can quantify this, one psychohistorian said, voice tight with excitement that transcended the recent fear, if we can develop mathematical models that predict Force influence on human behavior, we can incorporate your people into the Selden Plan. You stop being unpredictable variables and become predictable ones. Different from baseline humans, yes, but different in ways we can account for. That's what we're hoping, Ordain agreed. But it will take time, generations perhaps. The Jedi have spent millennia developing our understanding of the Force through experiential learning rather than experimental science. Teaching you to quantify what we know intuitively will require developing entirely new analytical languages. Then we begin, Hardin decided, with the pragmatic determination that had made him Foundation's most effective leader in centuries. Joint Research Initiative. Foundation scientists work alongside Jedi to develop comprehensive models of Force mechanics. In exchange, we teach your people psychohistory, show you how mathematics can predict human behavior across populations large enough that individual variation becomes statistically insignificant. Perhaps your Force-enhanced perception can even improve our models by identifying variables our purely computational approach misses. It was a good plan, a necessary plan, the only plan that offered genuine hope for coexistence between civilizations. whose fundamental assumptions about reality were incompatible. But as the weeks became months, both sides discovered that collaboration revealed complications neither had anticipated. The Jedi learned that psychohistory wasn't merely predictive mathematics. It was a philosophy that reduced human beings to statistical patterns, that treated free will as an illusion emerging from deterministic processes. That viewed individual choice as irrelevant noise in the grand equation of mass behavior. For Force users who'd spent their lives believing in destiny and purpose and the individual's capacity to shape their own fate, the psychohistorical worldview was philosophically devastating. "They don't believe we matter," Kira confided to Ordain after a particularly difficult session with Foundation researchers. "Not individually. To them, we're just data points. Our choices, our struggles, our growth, all of it is just noise that cancels out across large enough populations. They can predict the Foundation will face 17 political crises over the next century, but they can't predict which specific individuals will resolve those crises because individual identity is statistically irrelevant." How do we reconcile that with Jedi philosophy, which holds that every life matters, that individual choice is sacred? "We accept that different analytical frameworks reveal different truths," Ordain replied, though he struggled with the same philosophical dissonance. Psychohistory reveals truths about mass behavior that Force philosophy doesn't address. The Force reveals truths about individual purpose and connection that psychohistory doesn't capture. Neither framework is complete. Perhaps synthesis requires accepting that reality is more complex than any single analytical approach can encompass. Meanwhile, Foundation psychohistorians were experiencing their own crisis as they incorporated Force phenomena into their models. The math worked, barely, but only by introducing variables that violated core psychohistorical principles. Dr. Miss presented her findings to the Foundation Council with visible reluctance. Preliminary models suggest that Force users operate partially outside standard psychohistorical prediction because they're responding to information streams that baseline humans can't access. Precognition, Force visions, collective unconscious awareness through Force connection. These create feedback loops where predicted futures influence present behavior in ways that alter those predictions. It's not that Force users are unpredictable. It's that they're part of a predictive system that includes itself, creating recursive causality our linear models can't adequately capture. "What you're describing," one council member said slowly, "is that the Force users can see our predictions and change their behavior in response. That makes accurate long-term prediction impossible, regardless of how sophisticated our mathematics become." "Not impossible," Dr. Miss corrected, "just exponentially more complex. We need models that account for beings who can perceive probability itself and bias outcomes toward preferred futures. That's not random chaos, it's intentional probability manipulation, theoretically quantifiable but requiring computational resources, orders of magnitude beyond what we currently possess." The Council absorbed this in silence, each member calculating implications that extended far beyond mathematical complexity into fundamental questions about the Selden Plan's viability. Then the dimensional rift changed everything. 6 months into the collaboration, the rift that had brought the Jedi to the Foundation universe began pulsing with increasing intensity. Foundation sensors detected energy signatures building toward critical threshold. Jedi felt disturbances in the Force that suggested something massive approaching from the other side. Master Ordain stood at a viewport on Terminus, staring at the rift's distant light above Anacreon, and felt certainty settling into his bones. They're coming. The Republic. They detected the rift from our side and they're investigating. Within days, perhaps hours, our galaxy will discover this one. And when they do, everything changes, Hardin finished, having joined Ordain at the viewport. Your civilization finds a galaxy where Force users are unprecedented, or where beings with your abilities would be effectively godlike compared to baseline human populations, where the Sith could spread their influence across billions of humans who have no defenses against Force manipulation. Tell me honestly, Master Ordain, what will your people do when they learn about us? Ordain wanted to offer reassurance, wanted to promise that the Republic would approach the Foundation with the same diplomatic care that the Jedi Order ideally represented. But honesty compelled a darker assessment. Some will see opportunity, Ordain admitted. The Republic is vast but fractious. Political factions that would love to escape oversight and establish themselves as rulers of populations that can't resist Force influence. The Jedi will try to prevent exploitation, but we're peacekeepers, not police. We can't monitor every Force-sensitive individual across the galaxy, and the Sith. He paused, the implications too terrible to voice, but too important to ignore. The Sith will see your civilization as the greatest opportunity they've ever encountered. Billions of minds to corrupt, an entire galactic empire to subvert, all without Jedi presence to oppose them, because this is a different universe where our jurisdictions don't apply. That's what I was afraid you'd say, Hardin replied. Dr. Miss has been running projections. If even a fraction of your galaxy's Force-sensitive population enters Foundation space, psycho-historical predictions become impossible. The Selden plan collapses. Our civilization loses the primary tool that's guided us for 8 centuries. We'd be navigating blindly through a future we can't predict, and trying to maintain cohesion against beings who can manipulate our leaders, our institutions, our very thoughts. We could close the rift, Ordain suggested, though even as he said it, he knew the proposal was inadequate. The Jedi have techniques for sealing dimensional tears. It would strand my task force here permanently, but it would prevent the 2 galaxies from further contamination. Would it? Hardin challenged. Or would it just delay the inevitable? That rift opened once. What prevents it from opening again? What prevents other rifts from forming? And more fundamentally, is isolation the right response to discovering a new civilization, or is it just fear dressed as prudence? They stood in silence, the 2 leaders from incompatible civilizations trying to find solutions to problems neither of their analytical frameworks had prepared them for. The rift pulsed again, and through it came the first scout ships from the Republic, small, fast vessels designed for reconnaissance rather than combat. They emerged into Foundation space and immediately began broadcasting on frequencies the Jedi recognized, Republic military protocols requesting status from the Lost Task Force. Ordain made the hardest decision of his 8-decade life. Open a channel. Let me speak with them before the Foundation does. Let me try to explain what they're walking into and what's at stake if they handle this incorrectly. The transmission went out. And within minutes, Ordain was speaking with a Republic admiral who'd been searching for the lost Jedi task force for 6 months, and who now faced the reality that they'd stumbled into something far more complex than a simple rescue operation. "Admiral, listen carefully," Ordain said, choosing words that carried the weight of absolute truth. "The galaxy you've just entered is home to a human civilization that has never encountered the Force. They've built their entire society on mathematical prediction of human behavior, a science they call psychohistory that works as long as all variables remain predictable. We are not predictable to them. Our presence has already disrupted their predictions catastrophically. If the Republic enters this galaxy with standard colonial or diplomatic protocols, we will destroy these people's civilization not through malice, but through simple incompatibility." "Master Ordain, we're here to bring you home," the Admiral replied, clearly struggling to process the implications. "The Council has been searching for you. There are concerns that your disappearance was separatist action, that you were captured or—" "We weren't captured. We discovered a new galaxy. And Admiral, I'm ordering you, as senior Jedi present, to hold position and prevent any additional Republic forces from entering until we've established protocols that protect the Foundation from Force user exploitation. Can you do that?" The Admiral hesitated, military discipline warring with the political reality that Jedi didn't actually command Republic military forces, despite often acting like they did. "I can delay additional forces for perhaps a week while reporting to Coruscant. After that, decisions about diplomatic contact and potential colonization will be made at levels above my authority. Master Ordain, you're asking me to potentially restrict Republic access to an entire galaxy based on concerns about cultural contamination." "I'm asking you to prevent catastrophe," Ordain corrected. "And I'm asking the Foundation to trust that not all Force users will exploit them, even though some inevitably will. Both sides need to accept risks that their analytical frameworks say are unacceptable. That's the price of first contact between realities that were never meant to meet." Over the following weeks, the negotiations reached a framework that both sides recognized as inadequate, but which represented the best they could achieve, given incompatible worldviews. The Republic would recognize Foundation space as sovereign territory, where Force users could not operate without explicit Foundation authorization. In exchange, the Foundation would allow limited Jedi presence to help develop psycho-historical models that incorporated Force phenomena, and to train Foundation personnel in recognizing and resisting Force manipulation. The dimensional rift would remain open but heavily monitored by both civilizations. Travel between galaxies would be restricted to authorized diplomatic and research personnel. And most critically, the Jedi Order would station a permanent garrison in Foundation space, specifically to intercept and prevent Sith infiltration. Recognizing that dark side corruption represented an existential threat to a civilization with no natural defenses against Force manipulation. It wasn't peace, it wasn't even stability, it was managed crisis. Two civilizations locked in perpetual tension, unable to fully trust each other, forced into cooperation by the simple reality that mutual destruction was the only alternative. Mayor Harden and Master Ordain stood together one final time before Ordain returned to the Republic to brief the Jedi Council on everything that had transpired. We've created something unprecedented, Hardin observed, looking at the joint research facility where Jedi and psychohistorians continued their work, despite knowing that complete synthesis might never be achievable. Two analytical frameworks, mysticism and mathematics, the Force and psychohistory, trying to coexist despite fundamental incompatibility. History suggests this ends in one framework dominating the other, or in both destroying each other, trying to establish dominance. History is written by those who survived it, Ordain replied. Perhaps we're creating new history. Perhaps Force and psychohistory aren't incompatible. They're just incomplete without each other. Your mathematics reveals truths about mass behavior that Force philosophy misses. Our connection to the living force reveals truths about individual purpose and cosmic will that your equations can't capture. Synthesis might not mean one framework absorbing the other. It might mean both frameworks expanding to accommodate truths they previously couldn't perceive. Optimistic, Hardin said, unproven but possible, which, given that we nearly destroyed each other 6 months ago, represents significant progress. The dimensional rift pulsed above them, and through it, both men could see the two galaxies now permanently connected. The Republic with its Force users and galactic conflicts, the Foundation with its psychohistorical predictions and mathematical certainty. Neither would ever be the same. The collision had changed both civilizations irrevocably, introducing uncertainties and possibilities that neither could have imagined before contact. In the Republic, the Jedi Council would struggle for decades with the philosophical implications of a galaxy where free will existed but was statistically irrelevant across large populations. Some Jedi would be drawn to psychohistory's promise of understanding mass behavior. Others would reject it as denying the individual agency that Jedi philosophy held sacred. In the Foundation, psychohistorians would revolutionize their field by incorporating Force phenomena into their models, creating new mathematics that could account for beings who perceived and influenced probability itself. But that revolution would come at the cost of the absolute certainty that had defined the Selden Plan for 8 centuries. And in the shadows between both civilizations, the Sith would plan. Because while the Jedi saw collaboration and the Foundation saw managed crisis, the dark side saw opportunity, 2 galaxies full of potential, waiting to be corrupted by those patient enough to exploit the weaknesses that idealistic cooperation would inevitably create. Darth Ravius remained in Jedi custody, but his imprisonment was temporary. Sith always escaped, always found new apprentices, always returned stronger from defeat because the dark side learned from failure, while the light side too often clung to principles that made them predictable. The war that no one could stop had ended, but the collision between mysticism and mathematics, between Force and psychohistory, between 2 realities that should never have met, that collision would continue for generations, reshaping both galaxies, creating synthesis where none should be possible, proving that when fundamentally incompatible systems were forced to coexist, the result wasn't necessarily destruction. Sometimes it was transformation. The dimensional rift stabilized, no longer pulsing with dangerous energy, but glowing with steady luminescence, a permanent bridge between worlds. A scar in reality that would never fully heal, and a reminder that the universe was larger, stranger, and more complicated than either civilization had believed possible. Master Ordain stepped into the Bifrost-like transport beam that would carry him back to Republic space, back to the Jedi Temple, back to a council that would struggle to understand everything he'd experienced. Mayor Hardin watched him go, then returned to the calculating rooms where psychohistorians were already incorporating the day's events into updated predictions that now included variables no one had imagined 6 months ago, projecting futures that combined mystical destiny with mathematical certainty in ways that defied everything Harry Seldon had believed possible. The Seldon plan had survived, but it had changed, evolved, may become something Seldon himself wouldn't have recognized, a synthesis of human mathematical genius and force-sensitive cosmic awareness, proving that when incompatible realities collided, the survivors weren't the ones who held most firmly to their original principles. They were the ones willing to transform,